G'day, ZiggyD here, back with some more Path of Exile. No funny business this time, because today I just want to share with you guys a guide to what has likely been the strongest build I've ever played in Path of Exile. This is, at its simplest, a self-cast SCION Spark build. Things get and look a little bit more fancier once you do things like use Volcaxic Rift to convert the lightning to chaos damage, but this build is very strong even with dodgy self-found gear, or items bought with a 10 chaos budget, as I showed off in my gearing series, Build a 10C budget gear set. And indeed, I did use this build as my league starter, self-round from the beginning. But once you start to scale up this build, it just becomes a dream. You sprint through maps in a haze of loot and purple puffs as mobs just die around you. I always thought Spark was a bit boring to play, but not like this. The feeling of Pierce Spark just flying through mobs as they evaporate is incredibly satisfying. And indeed, it was overconfidence due to the strength of this build that caused me to die. I face-checked a triple damage mod Volatile Devourer because at this point I just stopped paying attention to the enemies I was facing. Spark itself has been pretty strong since 2.1 and it didn't directly get buffed in Ascendancy, but a bunch of things did change around it. The Pierce gem, for example, received a more projectile damage buff, but perhaps for me the biggest change that initially sold me on trying Spark as my league starter before the expansion even went live was the Scion's Deadeye node. Someone at ZiggyD must love Spark because this node was made for it. Pierce, bringing you to 100% with the support gem, projectile speed, which in this style of Spark build is a big damage boost, increased damage as projectiles travel, and boy do they, and finally an extra projectile. It's godly for Spark. And not quite as exciting, but almost as powerful, is the Scion Berserker, which gives 10% more damage and 1.5% life leech all the time. You older Path of Exile players may recall a time where getting leech for elemental damage and spells was really quite difficult. You either needed the leech support gem itself, or you needed Atziri items. Well, how about 1.5% leech all the time from passives? And with Spark, it really is all the time as well. You'll have a ton of sparks flying around the screen at all times, and even if you get stunned or have to kite, your sparks will keep hitting and leeching as they bounce around. The 5% increased damage taken from the Berserker node doesn't even come close to balancing out the survivability gain from this. And then on top of the great Ascendancy node, SCION is perfectly positioned on the tree to get all of the skill effect duration nodes, which is fundamental to this build. So to explain why that is, I'll first take a look at the mechanics of Spark, a rather simple looking spell that has some really powerful and unique ways of scaling. So Spark is an erratically moving projectile of lightning damage that will, after 1.5 seconds, expire. If it hits an enemy in that time, it will deal its damage and then disappear. However, if the spark pierces, it will continue to travel onwards after dealing its damage to an enemy, potentially allowing it to hit additional enemies. And that's the first key point of our build. We get 100% chance to pierce by combining the Pierce support gem with the Scion Deadeye node. This ensures that no matter what, sparks will continue traveling and hitting enemies until their timer is up. And that brings us to the second point of scaling in this build. You can increase the duration. 1.5 seconds becomes 2.85 seconds with the duration nodes surrounding Scion, almost doubling the time a spark will continue to travel and deal damage on the field. Now you can amplify the effects of this duration increase by increasing the speed at which the spark projectile travels. The faster it goes, the further it will travel in that 2.85 seconds, and the further it travels, the more enemies it will hit. Now here's what really brings it all together. Spark will bounce off walls, and when it does so, it becomes able to hit targets it has already hit again. And not only that, all sparks from the same cast can bounce off a wall and potentially come back and hit the same target. This is why you'll see bosses in small rooms or against a wall just instantly melt to spark builds. Essentially, the restrictions against shotgunning with projectile skills in Path of Exile can be bypassed by bouncing sparks off walls. And Pierce, Spark Duration, and Projectile Speed all come together to help achieve that. Any one of these things, Pierce, Projectile Speed, Duration, and number of projectiles, are all ways to nicely boost Spark's effectiveness, but when they combo together, it becomes really insane, and that's where the magic is. So now let's talk about Volcaxic Rift and Poison in a Spark build. But before I do, let me be clear. You can do this build with wands instead. And you are going to actually get more damage from dual wielding wands than you would with a Volcaxic Rift. When you factor in the spell damage, added lightning, cast speed, and especially the projectile speed on wands, you can achieve insane levels of DPS. If you're playing softcore, then you could opt for dual wands and have a cheaper plus higher DPS setup. However, you're probably going to die to Reflect at some point, and that's where Voltaxic Rift steps in. Voltaxic converts lightning damage to chaos damage, which is non-reflectable. It's also not subject to elemental resistances or elemental equilibrium either, so it makes mapping in hardcore both safe and simple, saving a lot on map crafting costs. Now, although you do not directly get any damage with Voltaxic for a Spark build, you can still leverage chaos damage in this build to achieve extremely high damage, the kind that will melt things even in red maps, and yes, even indeed at Zeri. This is thanks to two things. First, the ability to use Drill Neck in a Pierce setup. For some reason, Arrow Pierce still applies even though you're not using arrows, so that's 100% projectile damage on a quiver, making up somewhat for not using wands. But secondly, and most importantly, is the interaction between projectile damage and poison. If you use poison with Voltaxic Spark, any projectile damage will apply twice, an effect known as double dipping. That is, it will scale the initial hit of the spark and then again the poison damage. This basically means that for poison, projectile damage is more than doubly effective. And then in this build, that duration scaling we got earlier, it also increases the duration of the poison, amplifying its damage further. Projectile damage from the tree, drill neck, other gear, and more projectile damage from things like Pierce make for some pretty potent poison damage. This poison is a huge boost to your ability to take on really tough single targets and higher levels of content. Just for the record, in this background footage, I'm only using a 5-link chest that I bought for 2 chaos, and I'm missing the helmet enchantment that would give 2 additional sparks to every cast, which would be an insane damage boost. So it's obviously got the offensive side covered. Surely to achieve that level of offensive power, we have to sacrifice something on defense. Well, not really. This build stacks up really well defensively. Obviously, killing things so fast has its own defensive merits, as does being able to kill things off screen with Spark. Sparks with high duration and high projectile speed mean that you don't often even need to be on the same screen as a boss to be able to kill them with this build. On top of that though, we do have the huge sustain afforded by Berserker's 1.5% life leech, and I pair that with 2% additional life leech to closer enemies from Warlord's Mark, which also feeds us a constant supply of endurance charges. Warlord's Mark is applied to mobs around us by Herald of Thunder's lightning strikes, which still happen thanks to Voltaxic, allowing your chaos damage to shock enemies. Layered on top of that is Arctic Armor and a Basalt Flask to aid in physical mitigation. We're able to get some evasion going as well. I'm at 28% chance to evade at level 87, but you could push this higher with good hybrid evasion gear. A pretty decent life pool can be achieved as well thanks to SCION Life Cluster. I have 5400 at the moment, with plenty of room to grow that to 6.5 or even 7k with some investment. And then on top of all of that, our duration scaling gives us a huge double whammy of defensive skills. Firstly, we have effectively 100% uptime of Vile Grace thanks to it lasting almost 16 seconds. This is more than enough time to recharge it while clearing in most maps, and this gives us an additional 34% chance to dodge spells and attacks all the time. And we then use a cast when damage taken Immortal Call setup, which affords us about 4 seconds of physical damage immunity whenever it goes off, thanks to the combination of duration scaling and constant endurance charges from Warlord's Mark. Even if you do get caught without endurance charges, you still get 1 second of physical immunity when it goes off, enough to save you from a barrage of quills or arrows all thrown at once. It's really the stuff of min-maxing Legend the way that duration scaling affects both offensive and defensive components of this build. So now let's talk the nitty-gritty of skills and support gems and then the passive tree and gear so that you guys can make this build for yourself. You want a quality spark for this build as it gives projectile speed. Try and buy it 15% or above. Supports for the Voltaxic Rift setup are Echo, Pierce, Poison, and then for the 5th and 6th links, your choice of Controlled Destruction, Faster Projectiles, or Innovate. All great options, really. I like Innovate for lower tiered content clear speed especially, it makes you run and clear really fast. And you could also use a quality added Chaos as well. If you're using wands instead of Voltaxic, you simply substitute Poison for Lightning Penetration, pretty simple stuff. We use Vile Haste and Vile Grace in a 4-link with faster casting and a quality increased duration. This is a pretty expensive set of gems, so you can use Vile Spark with Echo, Pierce, and a damage gem as a cheaper alternative earlier on to boost your clear speed. This dual Grace Haste setup is very strong however, and worth investing in. All you need to do is wait for them to charge up at the start of a map, and then slightly stagger their use and you can maintain uptime on both. Or if you're clearing a little slower, you can save them for when you need them against tougher enemies if you like. Our cast when damage taken setup is a level 7 cast when damage taken linked to a quality increased duration, a level 9 Immortal Call, and a level 9 Chaos Golem. You could use a Flame Golem or a Stone Golem instead if you like. Your other 4 link is going to be Herald of Thunder linked to Curse on Hit and Warlord's Mark, and then Clarity as the final socket. And then the rest of the skills are just thrown in the 6 socket Voltaxic. It doesn't even need to be 5 or 6 linked. These skills are Blink Arrow linked to faster attacks, Flame Dash linked to faster casting, and then Rallying Cry and Arctic Armor, so all you really need is 2 links on your bow. And with that, let's talk about gear, which is actually pretty simple. You already know about Voltaxic Rift, just take note that the rolls on it don't matter at all, so just get the cheapest one you can find. We also already mentioned Dual Neck, but you may not have known that the 10% PS chance on it is useless in this build, so you can find a corrupted one like this one for cheap. Another awesome but not in any way compulsory unique item is Winds of Change Gauntlets. These give a cool combo of projectile damage and projectile speed. The negative movement speed is a bit of an unfortunate drawback that I felt was worth it in this case, but it's totally fine just to use a pair of rare gloves with life and resist. A unique that I really like is Victario's Acuity. This is just made for Spark, I feel. It gives you Frenzy and Power Charge generation. If you don't have this, you can simply use Blood Rage instead, by the way. And then it gives projectile damage per power charge and projectile speed per frenzy charge. Really great damage boosts and easy charge generation. Your helmet and belt slot are just as much life and resist as possible. Boots should aim for 30% move speed with life and resist, and any bonus evasion you can get on any of these defensive pieces is going to be great as well. And then for other jewelry, I just got life and resist, but any spellcaster stats like cast speed you can get are a bonus. Really simple stuff, and surprisingly not that expensive, especially since all of these uniques are optional, and even if you do choose to go for Voltaxic and Drill Neck, you can get really cheap versions of them. Based on prices at the time of writing, my current gear set is worth less than 2 Exalts. It's pretty insane for the level of power this build has. For the passive tree, I went out of the bottom of SCION first, got the duration nodes, and then went left through the SCION life wheel. From there up into Elemental Overload and the cast speed, picking up life and duration along the way. And then down into the central area of Templar. After this I went into the Ranger area to get life, and then into the Duelist area. From here it's just a matter of filling out nodes as you see fit, getting life or damage nodes as you feel you need them. One key point of interest that I haven't discussed yet is that I'm currently using the Inspired Learning unique jewel below Duelist. This jewel gives a mini headhunter effect of giving you a random affix of each rare monster you kill. With the clear speed this build has, it seems decent, but I'm not super sold on this unique. It's a whole bunch of points to invest, and Cloth and Chain plus Revelry are a bit of a waste, while the benefits this jewel give are pretty sporadic. Honestly, I only really notice it if I get like a quick affix or a haste aura. So I don't really recommend this jewel, but you can try it out if you like. As for other jewels, your priorities are life, projectile and chaos damage, and cast speed. Lightning damage is pretty subpar compared to the double dipping afforded by chaos or projectile damage, but you can get some if you like. When it comes to mapping and gameplay, this build can do almost any map mod. In fact, there's nothing it explicitly cannot do. And in fact, mods like Elemental Equilibrium and Reflect maps and Resistance maps are all freebies, so run these whenever possible. The only thing that poses a bit of a danger to this build, apart from triple damage volatile devourers, is Lightning Thorns. Lightning Thorns is not really Reflect, it actually gives you a flat hit of lightning damage based on each time you hit the enemy with the Lightning Thorns buff, so Voltaxic doesn't make you immune to it, and in fact Spark having lots of sparks on the field can be a little rippy to the Lightning Thorns. All this really means is that you should avoid the boss on Promenade because she casts Lightning Thorns on her companion. You'll be able to do every tier of map on this build, Labyrinth both at Zeri and Uber at Zeri. I haven't tested all of the content myself yet, but I have had a few of my viewers running the same build reporting back their Atziri farming efforts and so on. This really seems to be a great build for all content, and in my opinion one of the strongest in the current patch. Just try not to get overconfident and watch out for volatile devourers. Any questions you have about the build, feel free to ask in the comments below. That's it for now, I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.